So for our doors, the plan is to have our player interact with them by pressing a hotkey. I want to give them an interact hotkey that they can use to just use any object that's interactable. To do that, we're going to need a new script for our player, a player interaction controller script or a player interactable script or something similar that's going to handle our interactable objects. And then we're going to need a new UI element as well to let our player know that they can interact. So let's start with the UI element. We're going to go to our robot, and underneath our robot, we're going to add in a new canvas. So I'm going to right click, choose UI, and choose canvas. We're going to change the render mode to world space and the scale to be 0.01, 0.01, and 0.01. Next, we'll reset the position to 0, 0 on the X and Y. It should already be 0 on the Z, and change the height and width to about 100. Now you should be able to see that object if we drag it up here. So if I set this up to like a 1, drag it up, you can kind of see that little canvas object. So let's make, oh, I made it too small. It's 10 by 10 instead of 100 by 100. So make it 100 by 100, and now you can see that block right there. This is going to be where we're going to put our text, but that's obviously not quite wide enough. So I think I'll triple this to about 300. We'll right click on it now and add in a UI element that's going to be a Text Mesh Pro Text. So, oops, got to go select Text Mesh Pro Text. And then in here, I'm going to make this fill. So I'll hit the anchor, Alt and Shift, and click on the fill option. Then we'll go down and we'll center it and center it again. So it's centered horizontally and vertically. And then finally put in some text like interact. And then maybe give them a key. Maybe it's E. I don't remember if I already bound up E, but if not, we could use something like that. Now, I can't see this on my view very well. I think it looks kind of terrible. So I'm going to change the font. We'll go over to I'm going to go with bangers and like a bright red just to make it really obvious with an outline or maybe a drop shadow. So now I've got this text that says interact over my head in bright red, and I think that that'll probably look okay. If I hit auto size, I can make it a little bit bigger, make it fill out that area, and I'll use this, I think, as my interaction canvas. So I'm going to rename this to interact canvas, and then we're going to go to our player and we're going to create that new script, this player interaction controller. So hit add component, type in player interaction controller, and generate my script. If that's not in the scripts folder, I'll move it over there in a moment. It's probably going to be in my prefabs folder. Let's see, go click on it. It went into the root assets folder, so I'll click and drag it into scripts. And then we're going to open it up. So our player interaction controller is going to need to do, well, really two things. It needs to keep track of when we're inside or what objects we can interact with, and then it needs to tell those objects to be interacted with. So I think the first thing we'll do is just get rid of start and update. I'm not sure if I'm going to need start, update, I'm almost positive we won't need. And then we're going to add in, let's add an awake and cache our Text Mesh Pro Text first. So I'll say underscore text, or let's call it interact text, equals get component in children, and we're just going to get our TMP text. Now we could make a serialized field if we end up with multiple interactable or multiple text objects under the player, but since we only have one for now, it's easier and less maintenance to just have it cache it in our awake. Next, we're going to have some sort of way to interact. So let's get our player input as well. Say underscore player input equals get component, and since this is going to be on our player, we should just be able to get it at that level. Player input. We'll generate a field for it, and we need to add the using statements for it as well. So that added our using Unity engine.input system. And then finally, let's bind up for the interact action. So we'll say player input.actions, and we'll call this the interact one, and we'll say performed. That's the event that gets called back, and we're going to call a method named, let's call it interact. So we'll register for the performed event and call our interact method whenever that happens. Oh, and I guess we should probably disable our interact text by default too. So we'll say interact text dot GameObject.setActive to false. We'll just turn that object off. We'll turn it back on whenever we can interact with something. All right, so now we've got a base for being able to interact, but we don't have something to actually interact with. We're going to need to go back to the door for that. So in our door, when a player enters our trigger area that we're going to set up, I don't think we've set one up yet, we're just going to tell our interaction controller that, hey, this thing can now be interacted with, the player has come in. So to do that, we'll add an onTriggerEnter2D. And we'll say, well, first let's get the player. We'll say var player equals other dot get component, and we'll try to get the player. If there's no player, then we'll just bail. But if we do have a player, then what we want to do is tell our player's interaction controller system to add this object. So instead of getting the player, why don't we just get the player interaction controller? We'll do that. We'll do player interaction controller, and then we'll say player, which is actually the player interaction controller. So let's call this player interaction controller, control R to rename. And we'll say dot add, and we'll just add in this object. So we're going to add a method for add, which right now takes a door, and you probably have a good idea of how to make that more generic for a more generic interactable. I'm hoping you've got that concept down, but since we only have one thing right now, we're just going to use doors, and we'll say underscore doors dot add door. We'll generate a field for that, and that should be a list of door. Makes sense. Again, if we go to an interface or something more generic, it would be a list of that type of thing. And we'll initialize it to a new list of doors. There we go. I guess the new shortened down would have been just fine. Just out of habit, went around and made it longer. All right, so we've got our doors being added. We also probably need to remove doors if our player leaves the trigger. So let's duplicate the trigger enter. Left arrow enter, and change enter to exit. And then change add to remove. Generate a method again. And here, of course, we're just going to say underscore doors dot remove, and we'll remove that door. So now we've got a door that we can go in or add a door, we can remove a door, and then finally we just need to be able to interact with doors. So in our interact method, we'll do a for each. Var door in underscore doors, and really there should only be one door ever active. But if we extend this to be more generic with more interactables, then you could theoretically have more than one interactable object in the area. And we'll just say door dot, and then how do we want to do this? Probably call like a interact, and we'll pass in our object that's interacting with it. Because remember, more than one player could be in the game, so we need to make sure that our interactable object knows what thing is interacting with it. We'll generate a method for our interact. And then this is just gonna, teleport the player from one door to the other, I think. So we just need to know which door we're at, and then teleport to the other one. Now, I think this is a perfect place for a quick little challenge. So if you've got some ideas of how you want to accomplish that, go ahead and give them a try now. Experiment a little bit and see what you can come up with. The solution should be relatively simple, though. When we're interacting with a door, we're going from one door to another. We just need to figure out which door we're going to. So go ahead and track that down, and then I'll show you my solution. Or go ahead and experiment and figure it out, and I'll show you mine. All right, let's go through my solution. So what I want to do is pick a destination based on whichever door is furthest away. Whichever door is the furthest away one is the one that we want to teleport to, because we're obviously closer to the other one. So say var destination equals, and here we're just going to look at the distance. So we'll say vector2.distance, and we're going to go from our player interaction controllers transform.position to the opened transform position, open one transform position. So we're going to say if this distance is greater than, and let's just zoom that out a tiny bit, and then we'll duplicate or copy this line, and we're going to check if it's greater than the distance to number 2. Then we'll do a question mark. Destination is going to be open one.transform.position. Otherwise, we'll do the colon. It's going to be open one or open2.transform.position. I said my words backwards, but hopefully you get the idea. So if this one is further away, if number 1 is further away, then we'll use number 1 as our destination. If number 2 is further away, we'll use number 2 as our destination. And that's just because the one that's closest to us is the one that we're already on. So we need to go to the one that's far away, not the one that we're already on. And then finally, we'll just tell our player to move there. So say player interaction controller.transform.position equals destination. Now let's get back into Unity and finish our interaction setup. So the first thing I want to do is let's move our player over here to like a 15. I want him to kind of drop just by that door so that he's nice and easy to get to. And then I want to add in our player input action. We need an interact action. So let's go find the jump action, duplicate it with Control D and rename it to interact. All the hotkeys work here, by the way, F2, Control D, and all that. And then I'm going to set the hotkey here to E because that's a pretty common hotkey for interaction. We'll delete out the PlayStation control and save that change. Next, we need to add in some colliders to our doors so that our triggers can actually fire off. So I've got open 1 and open 2. We'll hit add component and add a box collider 2D with the is trigger option set. I'm going to save. And right now, if I hit play, I don't expect, well, actually, let's go back into our interaction script real quick and just make sure that when we enter a trigger, let's do it right here. After we add ourselves, let's also turn on our text, because I realize I don't think I've done that yet in our player. So when we add in a controller, let's go into add. We'll say underscore interact text dot set active or game object dot set active to true. And then when we remove a door, we're just going to check if there are no doors. We'll say if underscore doors dot count is equal to 0, then we're going to set it to false. So we'll turn that interact text off. All right, now let's save and play and watch and see if the interact text comes on. I've got my doors in the open state right now, so I'm going to drop right into it without having to get the key and see if I can interact with them and teleport or not. We're going to expect to see a big fat no, but let's watch and see if that's the case. So I drop in. Oh, I actually can. Okay, perfect. That works perfect. Oh, that's because I cheated and I already pre-added my composite collider. Let's stop and remove that though. So if I don't have my composite collider and my rigid body on the door that I accidentally pre-added and I press play, you'll see that I drop down and no trigger fires off. And that's because the triggers or the colliders are on the child objects and the script is at this parent object. So the cheat that I had used, and let's pause and re-add it, is to add a composite collider, which automatically adds a rigid body. And if I don't change this to static, the rigid body will fall down, and then press play. And now what happens is it creates a single collider that consists of those 2 colliders. So it's a built-up collider of the 2. So now I can use the script at that parent level and then have the colliders be children. So let's jump up there and actually try using it. So jump up, come over here and hit E, and you can see I can teleport over and now switch out to the next level. So let's stop playing and just double check that I've got that composite collider re-added to my door. I don't, so I'm going to re-add it and set that back to static and save, and then we're going to go check in our changes. So we'll go in here, so we've added the working interactable door and check it in.